Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you. Let me talk again about the surging increase in violent crime. I believe that two of the most effective ways to address violent crime are through surging FBI resources to the most affected communities through joint federal, local task force, such as Safe Streets task forces. You and I heard the commentary from law enforcement, local and state law enforcement, when we were together in March in Kansas. I understand that as of May, I think it's early May, the FBI surged resources in 6 field offices, and it secured significant arrests and firearm seizures from violent criminals. Director Wray, is the FBI considering additional resource surges over the coming year or expanding its existing task force network?
So on the surges, I think what you're referring to is a new team that I created about 6 months or so ago, which is called our Violent Crime Rapid Deployment Teams. And what that does is we've been sending it to particularly hard-hit hotspots or cities at the embrace or request of both the FBI field office and our local partners to assist. And we've had very good luck in the 6 or so cities where we've done that. I know in Buffalo, for example, several months ago, we had about a 50% decrease in homicides during the surge. In Milwaukee, I think we had a pretty significant decrease. But that's by its very nature somewhat temporary. We can't send those teams to just be there sort of in perpetuity. So part of what we're trying to do is both achieve a short-term dramatic reduction by listening closely to the locals as to what they most need, but then also trying to put in place things that will have a more sustained, durable impact that will outlive the team's deployment. We expect to continue that model, to keep sending that team to different places, but ultimately, as you and I think discussed recently, this is a problem, the violent crime problem, that dominates every discussion I have with chiefs and sheriffs all the time. We had our last nationwide data was a 5% increase in the violent crime rate, which doesn't sound like much to some Americans until you stop and think that means 67,000 people, victims of violent crime that would not have been a victim the year before. And the homicide rate went up 30%, which is, I think, the highest in like 50 years increase. So any resources the subcommittee would be able to send us on the violent crime problem could immediately be put to very effective use, and there'd be a lot of state and local partners who would be very grateful as well, because one of the things we're really trying to do all across the country is lean in to see where we can take cases federally to get some of the worst of the worst and to dismantle some of the most significant gangs and keep them off the streets for a much longer period of time.
Director, let me explore just a minute longer the idea of surging, and the point you make, I think, is a good one. Certainly anyone whose life is saved or property is not stolen because of a surge, that's a valuable thing. But what we need is longer-term results from that surge. So is there something that happens structurally? I mean, first of all, I'd say is we're getting more guns out of the hands of people who are not entitled to have guns, I assume, in that surge. And we're putting more criminals who are likely to commit violent crimes to be incarcerated. Those ought to have some longer-lasting effect rather than just the amount of time that your additional resources are in the community.
You're exactly right. There are two key concepts here, partnership and intelligence. Partnership meaning it's got to be a team effort. It's got to be, how do we put the FBI's two together with the state and local law enforcement partners and ATF and DEA and marshals, put one agency's two with another agency's two and have it equal more than 4, right? How to get a synergy where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So partnership is key. And then the second piece, intelligence, is when you hear intelligence, really what you should take away from that, what Americans should just take away from that is that's better understanding the problem in order to prioritize going after the thing that's really driving the violent crime in order to have a longer lasting impact. So that might mean identifying particular gangs that are wreaking havoc on a neighborhood. It could mean a particular neighborhood that is disproportionately being fought over by Team 2 gangs. It could be any number of things, but if you get good intelligence and then the partnership acts based on that intelligence with a strategy, that's how you get an impact that lasts longer.
Works out well. I'd be interested in knowing, Director, if there's any characteristics about the communities that have the most significant increases in violent crime, the most prevalent violent crime. When you focus your efforts on a particular community, what is the common denominator among those communities? And then perhaps we can try to deal with the underlying reason that a community is experiencing that increase.
You know, violent crime is, by its nature, unfortunately, a little bit different everywhere. And that's why we really have to take not a one-size-fits-all. And so what I mean by that is, in one community, it might be a particular neighborhood gang that has just run amok. And if you really drill down, you may find that the homicide rate is being disproportionately driven by that one gang's activity. In another community, there could be a rampage of commercial robberies or carjackings, and that's what's really driving it. In another place, it could be a particular neighborhood or a particular corridor on a highway that's part of a drug trafficking route. In another place, it could be, and this is something we are seeing in a lot of places, too many repeat dangerous offenders who are either out on bail or who have been not serving very long sentences. And the only thing more frustrating to law enforcement than having to arrest somebody who should be behind bars is having to arrest the same person over and over and over again.
That's a good point for that. That's something that can be pursued. That's a concrete path that could be advanced. Let me. I told Senator Shaheen one more question. I meant one more topic. And in September of last year, you testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee that the FBI's failure for its mishandling of the Larry Nassar investigation was, quote, inexcusable. It never should have happened, and we're doing everything in our power to make sure it never happens again. To that end, you testified that the FBI had begun implementing all 4 recommendations from the Inspector General's report. Could you please provide me with an update on where that implementation of those recommendations stand?
I could happy to provide it to you in writing maybe afterwards, if that would be helpful. I mean, for the most part, I think we've implemented all of them quite a while ago, and certainly we took disciplinary action against the one agent who was still with the FBI. You know, once we learned what had happened, and it's hard for me to explain to you how angry and upset I was when I learned what the FBI did and failed to do back in 2015. But I'm determined to make it right now that I'm here, and we're going to make sure that everybody in the FBI learns the lessons from that just tragic experience.
I appreciate that. Senator Blumenthal and I and our subcommittee in the Commerce Committee spent a year and a half exploring, investigating, and providing recommendations for legislation that became law. And we share that frustration, that anger about how everyone who should have done something didn't do it well or didn't do anything. And again, as you, I think, would agree, we would expect the FBI to be among the most purist in their willingness, desire, and capabilities to respond to somebody in need. So it is a terribly sad circumstance. And we await the Department of Justice making some decisions about what to do, if anything, in regard to those individuals.
And just to be clear on that part, you know, we don't. That's really between the Inspector General and the Department of Justice.
I wasn't suggesting it. It's a question I asked the Attorney General, but I wanted to highlight it for perhaps when he reviews your testimony, he will know that he's been questioned once again about this topic. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, thank you very much for raising that issue. And Director Wray, if you do send the response to Senator Moran, I hope, Senator Moran, you'll share it with the members of the committee, because I know there are a lot of people on the committee who are concerned about it. Your final exchange before that issue raised a question for me because you were talking about the federal crimes that you're investigating. And as we know, the top law enforcement official in our states when it comes to federal crimes are U.S. attorneys. And I have been very troubled by the delay in getting U.S. attorneys in place across this country. And I just wondered if you could speak to what happens if we don't have somebody in that role, if we have somebody who's just acting, or that U.S. attorney has not been officially put in place to take charge of those investigations, and what kind of challenges that presents as you're trying to bring a case before court.
Well, I want to be a little bit careful here. What I would say is the acting U.S. attorneys around the country, in my experience, are some of the most dedicated, most seasoned, most capable prosecutors, federal prosecutors that are out there. And I know a number of them personally and have enormous respect for them. Having said that, it is helpful to a U.S. Attorney's Office and to a law enforcement community to have a Senate-confirmed, presidentially appointed U.S. attorney, because at least in some districts, that's what's required for important initiatives to be pursued, for sometimes important personnel changes to be made in an office. Having served in a U.S. Attorney's Office and having been Assistant Attorney General dealing with all the U.S. attorneys, in my previous time in government, I know that that there is a level of ability to take action on certain kinds of things that I think is a little bit easier, certainly, for a permanent U.S. attorney. But I also want to be very clear that I think the acting U.S. attorneys that are out there are doing a terrific job, and they're working really well with our field offices.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the importance of reinforcing the job that those acting U.S. attorneys are doing. But I would just argue that at this time, when we're facing a lot of challenges with respect to increased criminal activity, that having the top decision maker in those offices is really critical, and we need to urge the administration to move those people if they haven't been nominated, and members of the Senate to approve them, so that we can get people in place, so that we've got everybody on the ground that we need in order to address the challenges that we're facing when it comes to crime.
May I make this bipartisan, please?
Please do.
I would join the chairman in making the request of the administration, and I suppose the Senate, should they be nominated, to act expeditiously to get us our U.S. attorneys, which are absent in many places, including my home state.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Director Wray. If there are no further questions this afternoon, senators may submit additional questions for the official hearing record. We request the FBI's responses in 30 days, and this subcommittee stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair. Thank you.